today we are running a special session on Japan. So it's a pleasure today to present this event, which is called Japan in the Indo-Pacific Political Economy and Security Perspectives. The event has been organized by our Department of Cultures, Politics and Society and TWA, the Torino World Affairs Institute, in partnership with IPSO, which is the International Peace and Sustainability Organization from Kyoto, and with the great support of the Consulate General of Japan in Milano and the Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo. So welcome everyone, welcome to my students, and welcome to our guests. Of course, this event is an hybrid event in this new geological era. We are getting used to this format, and so the event is taking place here in person on campus Luigi Einaudi in Torino, and online on our YouTube channels. I will introduce you all speakers in a while, but before that, let me welcome Professor Anna Caffarena, the president of Torino World Affairs Institute, and basically our boss, meaning that she is the head of the Master in International Sciences. Of course, we are running the lab within this program. So it's a great pleasure to have Professor Anna Caffarena with us today. And Anna, the floor is yours for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Giuseppe. I'll be really short because I'm really looking forward to listening to the very interesting presentation that we are about to listen to. Just let me say that I'm really pleased, both in my capacity as president of the Torino World Affairs Institute and the academic coordinator of the master program in international sciences, to welcome our friends from Japan, the Consul General of Japan in Milan, Mr. Amamiya, and the Vice Consul. So we are really pleased that you had this occasion to come to Turin and to visit the campus. I know it's your first time, so I hope it will be just the first of many occasions to have you with us. Of course, I really want to thank also Professor Gabuzzi for organizing this very interesting session, and all the colleagues that will be presenting during this morning seminar. The topic is extremely interesting. I say as a scholar interested in the dynamics of a changing world order. The Asia Pacific is a crucial spot in the international system. We have, I think, to look with a special attention to the changes that this region will be undergoing, and of course the way we think about the region, which is the main topic of today's seminar, is a sort of a prerequisite for all the other reflections. So this sort of presentation we will be listening to are really very welcome from this point of view, because they will allow us to build on them and reflect on many different issues that I think our students, and I take the opportunity to say hello to all of them. Most of them have been my students in the first semester, so it's a great pleasure to see them today. So I'm not taking more time. Thank you so much again let's say, pushing us to do more on the Indo-Pacific, on Japan. Thanks again, Professor Gabuzzi. Have a very interesting and pleasant morning of reflection. I will be attending most of it, so it will be my pleasure also to listen to all the presentation.
Thank you, Anna. And now we are going for the institutional remarks. Of course, this seminar could not take place without the support of the Consulate General of Japan in Milan. So here today in class, we have the consul, Mr. Yuji Amamiya, and also the Vice Consul, Mrs. Yuko Yoshimura. So thank you for coming all your way from Milan, and I wish you a pleasant stay in Torino. And without any further ado, I invite to the table Mr. Amamiya Yuji, the Consul General of Japan in Milan, for the institutional remarks. And before his speech, we will watch a video courtesy of the consulate, a short video. So please watch the video, and then we'll have the institutional remarks. So thank you.
The Indo-Pacific comprises Asia's rapid growth, Africa's vast potential, and the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This region, home to half the world's population, is thriving. However, it also faces various threats, such as military invasion, piracy, terrorism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, infringement of human rights, and natural disasters. To ensure both regional and global peace and prosperity, building a free and open international order based on the rule of law is vitally important. Per this idea, Japan launched the Free and Open Indo-Pacific, or FOIP, in 2016 and continues to promote this vision today. FOIP is open to all countries that share the vision and has already gained widespread acceptance and support worldwide, including ASEAN, the G7, the EU, the US, Australia, and India. Japan aims to develop a free and open Indo-Pacific in cooperation with those countries and regions through the following 3 pillars. First, the promotion and establishment of fundamental principles such as the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and free trade. Second is the pursuit of economic prosperity. And third is a commitment to peace and stability. All countries and regions that share the vision are now cooperating in such areas as high-quality infrastructure investment, maritime order, human resources development, and humanitarian assistance to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific.
Thank you very much for the video, and Mr. Amamiya Yuji, the floor is yours. So thank you very much again.
Professor Farena, President of the Torino World Affairs Institute, Mr. Giuseppe Gavuzzi, Professor of Turin University and T-Way, distinguished speakers, and students of Turin University. Good morning, everyone. Buongiorno a tutti. My consulate conducts a strategic communication program with the aim of strengthening better understanding of Japan every year in the northern Italy. For this, First, I should like to thank the University of Turin and the T-Way for their cooperation in making this year's seminar possible. Moreover, I am very happy to have this opportunity to say a few words at the opening of this important seminar today. The invasion of Ukraine by Russia infringes upon Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, constitute a serious violation of international law, prohibiting the use of force and undermines the foundation of the international order that forbids unilateral changes to the status quo by force. It is absolutely unacceptable that Russia has been expanding its invasion of Ukraine despite the strong condemnation by the international community. Japan condemns this in the strongest terms. Japan will continue to work with the international community, including the G7, of which Italy is an important partner, to improve this situation. It is meaningful that this seminar is thus being held today with the FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific, a Japanese diplomatic vision, as a core theme of discussion among scholars and students. Because in the Indo-Pacific region, some countries, either independently or jointly, are increasingly applying the logic of power and shaking up the existing international order. The guiding principles for dealing with this new international environment remain the same: the fundamental values and the principles of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The three pillars of the FOIP were established on the basis of these principles. It is very natural that Prime Minister Kishida stated at press conference after the Japan-US, Australia, India summit, so-called Quad, held on March 3rd, that, quote, unilateral changes in the status quo by force, such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, must not be allowed in the Pacific region, and that such a situation must not be allowed to continue. This is why we agree that it is important to further promote efforts to realize the FOIP, unquote. What is FOIP? I will leave the in-depth observation, study, and the discussion on the FOIP to the distinguished speakers who will follow me. But since I was involved in the iterated process of formulating the FOIP as director of the Law of the Sea Division of the Foreign Ministry from 2013 to 2015, just before the first announcement of FOIP by the then Prime Minister Abe in July 2016 at the Tokyo International Conference on the African Development, TICAD 4. I'd like to touch upon shortly the background of the making of FOIP. During the period of between 2013 and 2015, in the Pacific Ocean surrounding Japan, we experienced serious tensions. These included, first, massive poaching and illegal harvesting of coral by more than 200 Chinese fishing vessels in Japan's territorial waters and EEZ. Second, frequent incursions by Chinese public vessels into the territorial waters of Japanese territory, i.e. the Senkaku Islands. And third, China's construction of artificial islands and runways in the South China Sea based on the claims which violate the international law. The Philippines applied for an arbitral award under the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. China claims that it will not accept the award, although the tribunal award is final and legally binding under the UNCLOS. I myself often participated in the study sessions on these issues for then Foreign Minister Kishida. Japan has been continuing to voice its strong opposition to attempts to unilaterally change the status quo by force or coercion that are not in accordance with the UNCLOS. The FOIP was formulated under such circumstances. The FOIP was proposed in such a way to develop the Japanese government diplomatic concept of diplomacy that takes a panoramic perspective of the world map and the proactive contribution to peace based on the principle of international cooperation. A few comments on today's topics. Distinguished speakers and students, I noticed that you will talk about the FOIP in relation to either India, China, development issues, or European Union, EU. Please allow me to briefly touch upon the Japanese government's position on each of these issues. India. Prime Minister Kishida visited India last Saturday. During his visit, Prime Minister Kishida held summit meeting with Prime Minister Modi to discuss a wide range of topics. It was an opportunity to further deepen the special strategic global partnership between the two countries and to discuss ways to achieve a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Moreover, cooperation between Japan, the US, Australia, and India is also making steady progress, and various practical cooperation results are accumulating. We will have to address various agendas that Indo-Pacific region is now facing. China. Japan and China are neighbors and therefore have various problems. For this, it is important that Japan says clearly what needs to be said so that China will fulfill its international responsibilities as the second world's largest power. Japan is not competing with any particular country through FOIP, including China, that promote One Belt, One Road initiative. We will cooperate where we can. About Japan's aid policy, Japan believes that the human rights are universal values and that it is the duty of all nations to protect them. This is shared with Western countries. In addition to saying what needs to be said, it is also important to encourage voluntary efforts by each country through bilateral dialogue and cooperation, in which case the time may be right for such efforts. EU. A decade ago, it would have been difficult to foresee a meeting between Japan and Europe to discuss cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. However, nowadays Europe is increasingly wary of China in terms of security. Germany, France, the EU, Italy formulated or are formulating their own Indo-Pacific strategies. For this, we are confident that Japan has played a major role. On February 22nd, Foreign Minister Hayashi delivered a speech at the Indo-Pacific Ministerial Meeting, co-hosted by France and European Union. In his speech, he said that strengthening Japan's own defense capabilities and the Japan-US alliance are the core of its efforts to respond to changes in the balance of power in the region together with other like-minded countries. He also said that Japan and the EU, as like-minded countries, should be committed to first, maritime security initiatives to protect regional stability and prosperity. Second, providing infrastructure development assistance by presenting attractive and fair options. And third, promoting the development of a comprehensive regional strategy to ensure that developing countries comply with international rules. Japan and the EU should cooperate with other like-minded countries. Japan, while taking these issues into consideration, will pursue synergies with the EU Global Gateway under the Partnership for Connectivity. Japan will promote cooperation in the area of international common law for data distribution and the area of economic security. Ladies and gentlemen, having said this, I now look forward to hearing speakers, presentations, and interactive discussion among the participants on this specific topic of FOIP. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for setting the stage. Of course, in our lab, we have been looking at different Indo-Pacific strategies of different countries. Even the Netherlands now, they have an Indo-Pacific strategy. And so it's a great pleasure to start from the country, which basically, as we have just been reminded, invented the definition of the region and framed the entire narrative of the FOIP, the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. So without any further ado, I would just mention the six distinguished speakers that we have today, starting from Professor Gianluca Bonanno, from Professor Koga Kei, and Professor Giorgio Shani. They will be speaking in the first section of this lab. Then we will have a coffee break after the Q&A. And then in the second session, we will welcome Professor Takeshi Daimon Sato from Waseda University and Mrs. Giulia Garbani and Dr. Gudrun Wacker in the end, reflecting on the Indo-Pacific from the European perspective. I will introduce the speakers in due time. But first of all, let's start with Professor Gianluca Bonanno, based in Kyoto at Kyoto University, and also the president of the IPSO, the International Peace and Sustainability Organization. Professor Bonanno is also a research fellow at TWA, the Torino World Affairs Institute, and we have been collaborating for many years now. And I especially thank Professor Gianluca Bonanno for coordinating the Japan leg of this, the Japanese leg of this seminar and coordinating the speakers from Japan. We are sorry that Gianluca cannot be here with us today in presence, but I can tell you that he will be visiting our department. This is a world premiere. He will be visiting our department in May, June, and July. So even my students will have the chance to meet him in person and discuss our common interests in the region and in the academy. So thank you, Gianluca, and the floor is yours for your next 10 to 15 minutes. So thank you very much.
To our sponsors from the consulate, kokoro kara kansha moshiagemasu. I'm Gianluca Bonanno from the International Peace and Sustainability Organization based in Kyoto at the moment, as I hope you can see from the virtual background. I'm going to share the screen and jump straight into the, give me a second. All right, can you see the screen? Can you see it?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so I'll simply pave the way for the other speakers today this morning and dwell a little bit on why Open into Freedom under the FOIP framework I believe is a win-win strategy for all the parties involved in this new cooperation framework. And but just looking at the geography of the Indo-Pacific, we can easily understand how no region will be more important to global peace and prosperity in the coming years than the Indo-Pacific, which has more geopolitical hotspots, emerging powers, overlapping political and economic partnerships, as well as risks of conflict than any other. It is of such intrinsic global importance that many countries, as far as Canada, Mexico, Ecuador, Chile, Peru, on top of virtually all literal and non-literal countries in Asia, are signing free trade agreements with the region to make sure they're not left out. Now, despite its economic fluorescence, the region faces enormous challenges to stability and security as the Indo-Pacific century continues to unfold. The superpower contest for supremacy between the US and China specifically heralds the return of strategic competition, and perhaps even a second Cold War, as seen unfortunately in Europe these days, while regional tensions such as the South and East China Seas, the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Straits, and various historical disputes continue to simmer. So the importance of the Indo-Pacific cannot thus be explained without taking into consideration the increasing assertiveness of China and the coincidental relative decline of the US presence in the region. China, with its Belt and Road Initiative that will be discussed further on this morning by other speakers, has been aggressively advancing maritime and territorial claims in a bid to secure its energy and food requirements while boosting its trading ties. And these bullets on the slide are just a few of the recent occurrences that have had Indo-Pacific countries worry about increasing Chinese assertiveness. For a region as vast and as populous as the Indo-Pacific, the diversity of member countries inevitably implies exclusivity stances and biased bargaining power. So there becomes apparent the necessity to craft new rules to meet the challenges of a changing world and emerging needs. Now, the term order in international politics is not always well defined or understood. Order, whether global or regional, is a multifaceted concept that spans multiple domains, from political, economic, and security, and different forms of order, like, for example, the norm-based order, power-based order, or rules-based order, often coexist. And most importantly, order is something that usually major actors aspire to build or to maintain, to shape, to revise, in accord with their own national preferences or visions. Now, in any case, this assertion of the paramountcy of rules and laws in general in the regional order is meant to serve notice that unilateral and coercive power-based practices by illiberal actors are unacceptable to Japan and any other countries in the region. Now, perhaps more than at any time in the past, Japan has recently had a singular role in shaping an Asian as well as a US administration's diplomacy. The core idea of the free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP concept is to establish, as was just said by the General Consul, a rules-based international order and consolidate principles such as free trade, freedom of navigation, and rule of law in general, which are essential for the stability and prosperity of the region. And we can observe, in fact, an evolution in the Japanese positioning through a reactive phase, an adaptive phase, up to the current proactive phase Japan entered in the 2000s, and which accelerated under then Prime Minister Abe's second term from 2012. This, again, will be discussed by another speaker later on this afternoon, this morning, second part of this morning. It is notable that Tokyo itself has displayed such independent leadership in promulgating this rules-led vision, indicating that Tokyo is no longer content to be a rule taker, as it was in the past, but rather a rule maker in this proactive phase. And the shift was providentially encouraged by what is still the greatest deterrent and security provider in the region, which is the US, which has been sending out confusing messages to its allies recently, for example, by withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, under Trump's administration, and not promptly stepping up to defend the allies when in need. This rebalancing of powers has forced other countries in the region, the so-called middle power countries, which I want to put a little bit more stress on during this presentation, to reorganize and to form new coalitions. So, while the then Prime Minister Abe was certainly disappointed to watch the US retreat from his TPP, he did not hesitate to move ahead without Washington. And that's when other frameworks, such as the CPTPP or the RCEP, the Quad, AUKUS, and other minilateral agreements came to be. Again, Professor Koga after me will, I think, elaborate a little bit more on this minilateral agreements during his presentation. Now, we need to understand that as a trading island nation, Japan's focus on Asia did not disappear after the Second World War. It just demilitarized. Following the war, the country focused on developing strong economic ties with virtually all other Asian countries, in part because it didn't have to worry about its security, because it was under the umbrella of the Pax Americana Treaty. So, but let's not forget that Japan has been extremely active in Asia, especially in Southeast Asia, since the early 90s, through a plethora of high-quality investment projects, either with its own agencies or through the Asian Development Bank or other regional institutions, for example. The reality of the Indo-Pacific now is that security-focused frameworks are no longer as powerful and as binding as they used to be. The US has always valued security strategy, and the Indo-Pacific is no exception to them. But an Asian version of NATO is not and was never a viable option for the Indo-Pacific. And that's why the US hasn't been able to establish strong regional military alliances in the region. With the FOIP, Japan changes the tone into less military exclusive cooperation. And by doing so, it opens the framework to everybody, China included. Japan has a long history of massive investment in the Indo-Pacific. And although China's investment has grown significantly, Japan's added value lies in... Perfect. So probably, all right. Okay. So, FOIP open to every country. So this slide, right? Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, well, going on, I was saying that Japan has a long history of massive investment in the Indo-Pacific. And although Chinese investment has grown significantly, Japan's added value, as I was saying, lies in the attached technology behind it, the structure and the knowledge transfers that come with that investment. The truth in nowadays in the Pacific is that most countries value economic cooperation more than security ties. In other words, if a country manages to add value to its economic investments by providing critical technology and structured transfers, like Japan does, for example, then the idea is that security bonds naturally arise and the interests at stake will be more binding than a written military pact. The overarching goal is to increase sustainability, transparent, and well-built competition to Chinese proposals. an alternative to the so-called debt-trapped investment policy, but an alternative which also Chinese companies can adhere to and be competitive as long as it's a rules-based environment. So, for example, let's take just one case, the case of the LNG supply and the leadership role of Japan taken in this case in the energy sector. Japan has been encouraged by US and other actors in the Indo-Pacific to take upon a more proactive role, especially in the energy sector, also in the Indo-Pacific. For example, by reducing the US-Japan trade imbalance, or by providing liquefied natural gas as an alternative, low carbon alternative to coal, or by the preoccupations that countries could become dependent on China for energy shipments and infrastructure, or the necessity to keep sea lanes free and open, not only for Japan, but for the whole region. Now, Japan responded by, for example, buying LNG from the US and thus diminishing the trade imbalance, while providing regional consumers with an alternative to China, supporting Japanese shipbuilding and improving its domestic markets, while also providing LNG technology and technicians, thus giving all those involved a vested interest in keeping sea lanes open. And in case the worst happened, it would give Tokyo the ability to recall the merchant fleet with its LNG supply still on board to supplement Japan's strategic reserve. Now, this scheme, although it's an energy scheme and does not necessarily imply security things, this scheme includes extensive joint naval exercises and cooperation to protect ships from pirates, for example. Needless to say, the increased presence of Japanese and other littoral countries' coast guard vessels, for example, the Philippines, is per se already a good deterrent for China's adventurous maneuvers and provocations in international waters. And considering the fact that even India has very seriously stepped up its naval presence eastwards, well beyond the Indian Ocean, this very well serves the purpose of establishing the advertised rules-based order at sea. And if we consider that the annual value of trackable economic exchanges along Indo-Pacific sea lanes amounts to about $20 trillion a year, then we easily understand that no single country can maintain or enhance the rules-based international order alone. Now, although all parties claim that the approach to the Indo-Pacific is one of cooperation and not of confrontation, well, nobody is a Boy Scout here. So it is undeniable how intense geopolitical competition is increasing tensions, or trade and supply chains, as well as in technological, political, and security areas. And this gives room to a more realistic approach by other countries, the so-called middle power countries in the Indo-Pacific. In this case, well, Japan, as we said, but also India, Australia, and the EU. Well, other speakers this morning will talk about India and the EU. So, but if we just for a minute ponder about the case of Australia, we will see that although it was generally emphasizing economic cooperation with China in the past, now it's trying so hard not to bend to China's economic coercion, and it's rethinking thoroughly its alliance with other countries like the US, India, the UK, and Japan. And Japan enters the equation with Australia and Oceania as well here by ensuring its, for example, comprehensive support to Oceania's smaller islands countries. I'm thinking of Tonga, for example, giving them an alternative to China's increased presence, as well as alleviating Australia's burden of protecting its neighbours and thus protecting itself. The element of non-proximity has fundamental significance in securing the position of top strategic partners to the Indo-Pacific, in this case, the EU and Japan. So both Japan and the EU do not share boundaries with the region, but they commit their defense capabilities, as well as most of their exclusive economic zones, to the same region. And this is the best guarantee and promise of long-lasting mutual cooperation that the countries in the Indo-Pacific can get. A guarantee that neither China nor the US can give due to their geographical proximity and direct military interests. So we do really understand the potential of middle powers and the importance of non-proximity in this FOIP new framework led by Japan. And this is also shown in numbers, because if we look at the major investors in the Indo-Pacific, we see how, interestingly enough, in a twist of diplomatic assertiveness, the EU has recently become the first investor in the Indo-Pacific, closely contending the position with Japan, and both well ahead of China. So again, the power of middle part countries, the influence of middle part countries in the Pacific. However, and I'm done with the last slide, as in other countries in the Indo-Pacific, there are domestic divisions in Japan too. While the country's defense and strategic communities, for example, are clearly concerned about Beijing, the business community is heavily invested in China, muting some elements of strategic response. There's no question about it. However, China's handling of the COVID-19 situation served as a shock to the system. And many Japanese companies started to shift their supply chains out of China, as well as engaging with other supply chain resilience initiatives with India and Australia. So the long-term repercussions of a loss of trust in China as a sound economic investment could substantially affect Japan's positioning and could reduce uncertainty in hedging. However, unfortunately, the same can be said for Japan, which has very harshly punished the international business community by completely shutting down its borders for more than 2 years during the pandemic, and so did Australia. So from this point of view, Japan greatly gambled during the COVID-19 pandemic and has inevitably lost some of its credibility in terms of regional guarantees in times of crisis. How and how quickly will it regain this trust? We're all eager to see how it will perform in the following years. And I leave the continuation of the debate to my colleagues. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Gianluca, and thank you for your patience as well. And I think you introduced us very brilliantly to the very essence of the Indo-Pacific strategy with your speech, Opening to Freedom, a win-win strategy for all. So now we are moving to the second one, the second speaker being Professor Koga Kei from Singapore, from Nanyang Technological University. And the focus of his talk is Japan, Quad, and militarism in the Indo-Pacific. So thank you very much for being with us today, and the floor is yours for the next 10 to 15 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you very much. All right. So thank you very much for having me here in the seminar, Japan in the Indo-Pacific. And I would also like to particularly thank the Professor Giuseppe Gabuggi and also Professor Giancarlo Bonanno for organizing this. And just before starting my presentation, I have to apologize first because I have to excuse myself at the 5:30 p.m. in Singapore. That is the 10:30 a.m. in your time. So that is the 19 minutes. So I try to kind of make my presentation relatively short. But in my presentation the title is the Japan Quad and Multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific. Recently, I have been writing about the institutional development of the Quad and multilateralism and their implications for Japan's foreign policy and the Indo-Pacific strategic environment. So today's seminar is a great opportunity for me to present some of my thoughts. Just to make my presentation clearer, let me quickly introduce my core arguments first. And my core arguments are threefold. First, the Quad has been the core grouping for Japan's Indo-Pacific vision. And second, the Quad has developed into the so-called Quad 3.0. And third, the institutionalization of the Quad would cause certain diplomatic tension in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly with ASEAN. But there are certain ways to manage such tensions. So the first, the Quad has been the core grouping for the Japan's Indo-Pacific vision. As many of you have already known, it was Prime Minister Shinzo Abe who launched the Free and Open Indo-Pacific strategy, the so-called FOIP, in the 2016. Also, he considered it was important to strengthen strategic ties with the three regional powers in the Indo-Pacific region that are the United States, Australia, and India, in order to maintain the existing international order. In fact, Abe's strategic thinking was gradually nurtured since those four states cooperated for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in times of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. And although Japan did not envision the institutionalization of this grouping at that time, Japan became eager to strengthen political, economic, and security ties with those three the regional states bilaterally. And this is basically because of the China's assertive behavior in the East China Sea and the rising diplomatic tension between Japan and China in the 2000s. And Japan perceived the potential threat coming from China more acutely. So therefore, Japan under the first Abe administration that were the 2006 to the 2007 began to utilize its existing bilateral and then trilateral strategic ties to formulate Quad. At that time, the people called Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the QSD. For Japan, the concept of the Quad was also based on the Abe administration's strategic idea, arc of freedom and prosperity. This is a concept launched by then the Foreign Minister Taro Aso created in the which is created in 2006, and in that Japan aimed to push forward its value-oriented diplomacy, and it would assist regional states from Asia to Eastern Europe for facilitating democratization and market economy. Since the Quad member states were consolidated democracies, the Quad would become a strong vehicle for it. At the same time, the Quad aimed to strengthen its defense tie with each other. This is pretty much well illustrated by the Malabar, the US-India military exercise, which invited Japan and Australia to conduct the joint exercise in 2007. So therefore, in 2007, at that time, the Quad focused on the political and then defense cooperation. But the combination of political and military cooperation among those regional major powers became obviously the source of concern to China. And China explicitly questioned the purpose of the grouping and sending diplomatic note to all four states. And this did not immediately kill the Quad, but Australia and India were not keen to pursue the Quad at the expense of damaging their relations with China. And the diplomatic momentum for institutionalizing the Quad was lost. However, the Quad idea somewhat resurrected when Abe discussed the potential security cooperation among the four in his 2012 article, the Asia's Democratic Security Diamond, in the Project Syndicate, the online magazine. He emphasized the importance of countering China's maritime assertiveness in South China Sea and beyond, and advocated for the imperative of the Quad cooperation. And of course, this was written when his political party, the Liberal Democratic Party, was not in power. So he was able to say basically what he wanted to say. And when he became prime minister again in December 2012, he was somewhat restrained. But my point here is that the idea of Quad still survived and had potential to be resurrected. In fact, the Quad idea came back when Abe launched the FOIP in 2016. From that beginning, Abe considered cooperation with the United States, Australia, and India was the most important. And even when a Japanese prime minister changed from Abe to Suga and to the Kishida, the current prime minister, this basic principle has not changed. So therefore, the Quad has become the core grouping to realize Japan's Indo-Pacific vision. So that is my first point. And secondly, my second argument is that the Quad has developed into the so-called Quad 3.0. My basic point here is that we should not treat the Quad as it is, because the Quad is institutionally evolving. In this sense, I categorize today's Quad is the Quad 3.0. So let me explain the Quad 1.0 and also 2.0. Quad 1.0 was short-lived. As I mentioned, Abe took an initiative to create the Quad in 2007, but it collapsed because the member states did not really share the common the strategic perspective vis-a-vis China. And the Quad 2.0 was the one that was resurrected in 2017, when the United States started to create its own FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific. Given China's remarkable rise, all 4 member states were concerned about its assertiveness, but it did not reach to the point where the member states would make a strong commitment to the strategic cooperation. So therefore, the meetings of the Quad were relatively sporadic. The level of meetings were largely senior official level, and the agendas were not necessarily set. So this meeting format lasted for 3 years until 2020, or at the end of 2020. And then what we are witnessing is Quad 3.0. And under the Biden administration, it has been institutionalized by regularizing the ministerial and the leaders meeting, although it has not been formalized yet. It started off in the February 2021 when the 4 states held a summit meeting for the first time. And currently, its agenda and working groups have been set up and stabilized, focusing on such agendas as the counter COVID-19, critical and emerging technologies, climate change, infrastructure, connectivity, and cybersecurity. Through these evolutionary processes, we now see the Quad 3.0 is a more strategic cooperative framework rather than narrow military or defense ones. This matches with the objectives of the 4 member respective Indo-Pacific strategies, and this is to maintain and enhance the existing rules-based international order. And in addition to that, I would like to make one point, that is the United States under the Biden administration, the current one, takes a lead in the institutionalization of Quad, not Japan. And this is largely because the Japanese leadership changed. The Abe stepped down in the 2020, and although Suga did not change the basic principle and the policy direction of the Indo-Pacific vision, he did not take the initiative for the Quad, except for hosting the ministerial meeting. And the current Prime Minister Kishida also supports the Quad, but the administration has yet to clearly articulate the direction of Quad. And in this sense, the Japan became an active supporter rather than the leader. So with this background, I would like to discuss my final point, that is from an institutional perspective, the institutionalization of the Quad would cause certain diplomatic tension in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly with ASEAN. The member states of the Quad are materially capable, diplomatically influential, and economically attractive, so the Quad can shape a regional strategic landscape in the Indo-Pacific. However, the Indo-Pacific region includes Southeast Asia and East Asia, where ASEAN and ASEAN-led institutions operate under the banner of the ASEAN centrality. Although ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN has its own principle, the ASEAN centrality. And then this the principle has many definitions, but its diplomatic objective is essentially to prevent great powers from marginalizing ASEAN and its member states. Therefore, the ASEAN plays an important role in maintaining Southeast Asian agency and also the regional multilateralism. However, the institutionally strong Quad would have the potential to marginalize ASEAN. And given the increased number of the multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific region recently, such as AUKUS, this trend is likely to continue. And this is understandably so because there has been the growing frustration among the major powers about the existing regional security framework. They cannot actually address the emerging the regional security issues. So I guess this creates the institutional tensions, and then this tension becomes more visible. And how can we actually address such tensions? I believe that those multilateral frameworks and ASEAN are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and Japan can play a constructive role in bridging the two. And I don't want to actually go through all the laundry list, but I just want to emphasize one thing. That is Quad is actually institutionalized, but as I said, it's not formalized to the extent that it has the secretariat or assumes the status of the international organization. Therefore, there is a flexibility to cooperate with other regional states in certain areas, such as again, counter COVID-19, the cybersecurity, and critical and emerging technology and infrastructure as well. So sometimes people call this as the Quad Plus, but this format is actually really useful format. And Japan take an initiative to throw some ideas about which regional states, particularly among the ASEAN member states, can be a candidate for the cooperation in the certain fields. And by successfully cooperating them, the multilateral channels of communication be ensured among between the Quad members and also regional states, and they could help mitigating suspicions and tensions. And I believe Japan can and should play an active role in constructive role in this in the Pacific. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your focus on the process of institutionalization of Quad and the role that Japan can play, the active role in basically perfectioning this institutionalization, which is missing some elements. And now to the last speaker, Professor Giorgio Ciani from the International Christian University, with a focus on Indo-Japanese relations in a changing region. So thank you very much for being with us today. And Giorgio, the floor is yours for the next 10 to 12 minutes. Thank you.
Buongiorno e grazie per l'invito. Sono molto felice di poter fare una presentazione qui all'Università di Torino, and I very much hope to be able to do so in person. Dozo yoroshiku onegai itashimasu, as we say in Japan. As you can see by my background, I am a specialist in South Asia. I'm actually in Tokyo at the moment. And my university, International Christian University, is noted for instilling critical thinking in our students. So apologies if I make some critical remarks about the concept of the free and open Indo-Pacific with relations in relation to India and relations between India and Japan. In the interest of time, I will share my screen, and of central importance to, I will try and share my screen, and of central importance to the story of both FOIP and Indo-Japanese relations is what can only be termed a bromance between Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And I would argue that this has transformed Indo-Japanese relations. Okay, in terms of contents, I will attempt the impossible by looking at post-war relations between India and Japan before Abe. It should really be separated into relations during the Cold War and relations after the Cold War. I will talk about the rapport between Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Modi. We have already heard about the free and open Indo-Pacific. I'll briefly run through the main pillars of the approach before analyzing the Quad and their different interests and commonalities in FOIP, and pose the question with a FOIP after Ukraine, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I hope this will provide items and points for discussion. Okay, let us look at post-war Indo-Japanese relations. The first point to make is that India and Japan signed a peace treaty in 1952. Generally, there was no experience of Japanese occupation within South Asia. And indeed, there was a lot of admiration for Japan in the early years of the 20th century. So it was relatively easy for India and Japan to seek peaceful relations. And indeed, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister and leader of the non-aligned movement, played a key role in inviting Japanese participation of the Afro-Asian Conference in Bandung in 1955, which led to the birth of the non-aligned movement. In 1957, Japanese Prime Minister Kishi visited Delhi and established cultural ties between the two states. And during the backdrop of Cold War relations, where India and China were increasingly estranged, particularly India was very close to the Soviet Union, and China normalized its relations, Japan normalized its relations with China in 1972. Japan gradually became India's biggest ODA donor. So economic ties were particularly important. And this led, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, to Indian Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's Look East policy, where he sought greater engagement with East Asia and particularly with Japan. Now, a huge setback to this relation was the testing of the Pokhran 2 nuclear tests by India in 1998 by the first Bharatiya Janata Party government under Atal Vajpayee, which led to the imposition of Japanese sanctions. However, we do see within 3 years, the sanctions were lifted and a gradual improvement of relations. So we see an improvement of relations between India and Japan before the entry of Shinzo Abe as prime minister. So what was significant was during his first term, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited India, and 50 years after his grandfather, Prime Minister Kishi, and he played a key role in trying to engage with India. There are also similarities here and influences of his historically revisionist agenda, which we perhaps can touch on. And Prime Minister Abe initiated the Quad, a quadrilateral security dialogue, shortly before resigning for the first time. We pick up the story again in 2014 with the re-election of Shinzo Abe and the election of Narendra Modi as Prime Minister of Japan. And I think there are at some level an ideological symmetry or an ideological bond between both Shinzo Abe and Narendra Modi. Both can be termed in certain respects as nationalists, although Narendra Modi, due to India's constitution, is far more authoritarian than Shinzo Abe was permitted to be or was able to be by Japan's constitution. Modi visited Japan in 2014, and Prime Minister Abe was chief guest in India's Republic Day. In 2015, Japan was invited to be a permanent member of the Malabar naval exercise with India and the US. And this was particularly important. And then we have the launch of the free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP with India as a member of the Quad. Now, in 2019, Modi was re-elected as prime minister with a landslide. This is significant because he no longer needs to deal with coalition partners. The BJP have an outright majority, and just last month they won again. They were re-elected in India's biggest state, Uttar Pradesh, which has 180 million people in it. So this provides a subtext to my concluding observations about the direction in which India is going. And in 2020, Abe resigns. So in a way, this period which saw the birth of FOIP and greater relations between India and Japan comes to an end. Now, as we've heard from previous speakers and from the ambassador, FOIP is based on the idea of 2 continents and 2 oceans, Asia and Africa, the 2 continents, and the Indian and Pacific Oceans. It's an attempt at broadening Japan's strategic horizon. The pillars of FOIP, as we saw, are based on fundamental principles of a rules-based order, the rule of law, freedom of navigation, which is very important given maritime ties, and a commitment to free trade. The pursuit of economic prosperity through greater physical connectivity and through greater commercial enterprise, and a commitment to peace and stability and through capacity building. Now, analytically, although FOIP is inclusive, it's an inclusive concept, the Quad, the main members of it, Japan, Australia, and India, have common objectives in FOIP as countering the rise of the People's Republic of China, as we've heard in previous presentations and by the ambassador's speech, and also and specifically by China's Belt and Road Initiative. Discursively, the Indo-Pacific has been very successful. I mentioned this with some regret because a lot of courses in my university have been renamed Indo-Pacific. I used to be president of the International Studies Association Asia-Pacific region, but I'm sure that will be renamed at some point. So discursively, it has been very successful, and you have the launch of the United States free and open Indo-Pacific policy. In 2021, this was under the Trump administration, but by 2021, you have the first Quad summit presided over by Joe Biden. So it's the US basically trying to reestablish hegemony. This was hosted by President Biden, but was a virtual conference where they mainly discussed a vaccine policy, which was of particular importance given the epidemic of the pandemic within the United States and India. And just last month, we have the announcement of the US Indo-Pacific strategy, which borrows a lot of wording from the original FOIP report. It just adds the concept of resilience, again, something which we can talk about. However, the focus is to a large extent, not to a certain extent, on security. And if we look at Japan's constitution, particularly Article 9, this constrains military cooperation between the Quad members in the event, let's say, of an attack, possibly by the People's Republic of China. There are also questions which other participants and presenters have mentioned over the US commitment to FOIP and to the region after AUKUS, which is basically links between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the US, basically the armed Anglosphere, and the withdrawal from Afghanistan after 20 years. So there's an issue and understanding that the United States is wavering, if not declining. Also, another key problem are economic ties among the Quad are not as strong, with the exception of Japan and the United States, as with individual Quad members and the PRC. So if we look at India, which is the main recipient of Japanese ODA, it is only the 18th largest trading partner for Japan. It's the second largest population in the world, 5th largest economy. How can it be the 18th largest trading partner? There are limits here. And Japan is only the 12th for India. So the economic ties have not developed to the same extent as security ties. Okay, now for the last controversial bit. After Ukraine, whither the free and open Indo-Pacific. So these two gentlemen in the picture may be starting their own bromance. We have the Russo-China Friendship Treaty, which was renewed earlier this year. And just a month before the invasion, Premier Xi declares that the friendship has no limits before the invasion. We can only speculate as to whether he was privy to the decision to invade or not. However, what is important is the United Nations General Assembly resolution. If we look at the United Nations General Assembly resolution, this resolution is non-binding. It's not a UN Security Council resolution, but it's an assembly resolution which condemns what was, an illegal invasion of Ukraine. This is a contravention of international law. Now, Japan voted in favor of the resolution, along with most other states, most other members of the General Assembly, but not all of them. And interestingly and significantly, India abstained, and this strained the Quad relations. Now, when India abstained, also the People's Republic of China abstained, which may not have been the friendship which President Putin wanted. Pakistan, India's chief rival in the region, also abstained. And I would like, and I think we need to suggest that there are changes in the international order afoot. And particularly if we look closely at India, and this is something I have written about extensively, the dominant ideology of the Bharatiya Janata Party is based in Hindutva, which is an ethnicized religious nationalism. So its commitment to the liberal values of the rule of law are secondary to its commitment to ethnic nationalism. And some of their partners of the BJP were actually, pro-Russian in terms of looking at the actions. India relies a lot on Russian arms. Its main security alliance here is with Russia. And this brings me to my final point, which I have spent some time working on separately, which is that India sees itself as an emerging power, but not just within the framework of a free and open Indo-Pacific. It sees itself as an emerging power in a post-Western order in which these guys, China and Russia to a far lesser extent after their actions in Ukraine, play a key role. If you permit me, I would like to maybe share via chat a recent article, which, perhaps later, which will outline what I mean by the post-Western order. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Giorgio, for your very comprehensive look at Japan's relationship with India in the framework of FOIP. So let's get back in 10 minutes. We will have like a coffee break here on campus. So let's get back, I would say, by 10:55. Okay? So thank you very much again. See you soon. Bye.
Hello everyone. Welcome back to the second part of our webinar today.
This meeting is being recorded.
Immediately move to the first speaker of the session. I would just recommend all speakers to stick to 10 to 12 minutes for their presentation. I'm sorry for this, but in this way, we can have a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes of discussion after the last speaker. So we start with Professor Takeshi Daimon-Sato from Waseda University. And the focus here is on the relationship with China-Japan aid competition and the possibilities for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. I myself, I do some research in Myanmar, and I can tell you that clearly from places like Myanmar, you can see there is a competition going on between India and China in terms of aid for development, but of course there are also possibilities for cooperation, and so we will listen to Professor Takeshi Daimon-Sato to know more about this subject. Thank you very much, and Professor Takeshi, the floor is yours.
Giuseppe?
Yes?
I think Professor Daimon-Sato is not there yet.
Okay. Do you have some contacts? Are you?
He's in Mauritania now, and he went out to get a PCR test. He should be he should be back soon, I guess. So probably.
What is your advice? Shall we start from Mrs. Garbani?
I think it's better we move to the next speaker.
Okay, so we move to the next speaker, Mrs. Giulia Garbani. She's a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge, and the focus of her talk is Japan's aid policy in the Indo-Pacific, Abe Shinzo's hybrid legacy. Thank you very much, Giulia, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. It's great to be here. I am just trying to recover my presentation, and then I'll start the screen sharing. All right. Okay. Okay, here we go. Can you see everything and hear me right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, yeah, it's I'd be curious to know as well what Professor Daimon Sato has to say on the topic, but I'll go first, and this way he won't say something that I already am going to cover today. But obviously, given the importance of Southeast Asia as the core of the Japanese FOIP strategy, I really wanted to focus on how the FOIP idea has impacted the aid policy in Southeast Asia. And so I really wanted to focus on Prime Minister Abe because, as we said many times today, he's widely recognized as the creator, the father even of the FOIP, here most recently in a tweet by the US ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel. Just a few days ago, he openly called Abe the creator of the free and open Indo-Pacific. And really, Abe has pretty much used FOIP as a sort of a personal legacy to Japanese diplomacy, and is widely credited for really steering Japan away from the Yoshida doctrine and instead embracing what, for example, Giulio Pugliese and Alessio Patalano call the realpolitik Japan, a Japan that is not afraid of talking about the national interest, and that it really places itself as the defender of the international liberal order in Asia. So what does FOIP really say specifically about ODA policy and the aid strategy of Japan? So as we already heard from previous presentations, one of the goals of FOIP is that of pursuing economic prosperity through enhancing connectivities and including through quality infrastructure development in accordance with international standards. So obviously, the emphasis on connectivity and infrastructure is something that builds on the traditional strength of Japan's aid approach, which has really been based on relying on the expertise of Japanese corporations specialized in civil engineering projects and construction that are able to carry out large-scale infrastructural projects in Southeast Asia. And this has really also shaped the so-called public-private partnership model, which is really the signature approach of Japan to aid to the region. And however, it's also the reason why Japan's ODA policy has been also criticized in the past, because many times the perception on the ground was that Japan was going to build these white elephants, these projects that were really top down, one size fits all, and that didn't really benefit the local communities as much as the Japanese corporations many times. However, infrastructure continues to play a fundamental role in Japanese ODA distribution. As we can see here from 2019 data, it's still occupied 38.6% of the entire ODA disbursement of Japan. And as ODA becomes more and more a tool of competition with China, infrastructure is an inevitable choice, because many times Japan is not really given credit for this, but it is still the only country that can significantly compete with China in terms of infrastructure financing in Southeast Asia. So this concept within FOIP has been enshrined in the concept of high quality infrastructure, shitsunotakai infra, which really aims at presenting Japan as a more attractive and sustainable alternative to Chinese infrastructural projects. And here you can see one example in the picture, the Tsubasa Bridge, which was inaugurated in 2015. It was built by Sumitomo Mitsui Corporation and has really become one of the symbols of Japan-Cambodia cooperation in recent years, to the point of even being included in a bill of real in Cambodia, where you can see on the left the Tsubasa Bridge, and on the right an older bridge that Japan had already built several decades earlier, the Kizuna Bridge. So obviously ODA is becoming more and more a tool of geostrategic competition with China. in general, the Japanese connectivity trajectory tends to, following the FOIP concept, tends to bring together the Pacific with the Indian Ocean. So following a horizontal type of trajectory that really cuts horizontally from west to east, the continental Southeast Asia. And instead, China, with its Belt and Road Initiative, follows more of a vertical trajectory that goes usually anchoring on Kunming, the capital of Yunnan, and then going south. Myanmar, in this sense, is a really a perfect example, as Professor Gabuzi was saying. And so what does this mean in terms of the broader ODA strategy? Abe was particularly significant because during his premiership, he also oversaw the revision of the ODA Charter, which was approved in 2015, in which it was very clear that the priority is not the human security, but the national security. Again, because ODA is more and more understood of economic security, the projection of these interests in Southeast Asia. So this has sparked a debate in academia. Many, for example, Sasada Hironori, see this shift under Abe as simply a sort of revisionist move that goes back to the Japan model of the 70s and 80s. So again, the type of developmental state abroad that builds big infrastructural projects, favoring obviously tied aid that rely on Japanese private corporations. But other scholars, such as Katada Saori, instead say that we should look at it from a more hybrid point of view, because really during the 70s and 80s, there wasn't any of the strategic imperatives that the rise of China has really brought upon Japan, and in bringing Abe to reconsider the role of aid in Japanese outreach in Southeast Asia. So we talked a lot about the to really understand the magnitude of the impact of FOIP and Abe's premiership on aid, it's really important also to contrast it with what preceded him, which is really the so-called Ogata Shock, which refers to the period in which Ogata Sadako, a UN seasoned diplomat that became the president of JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, in the late 90s and through the 2000s, she really steered the discourse of Japanese aid policy towards the concept of human security, which was much more rooted in the idea of individual freedoms and human rights, against the previous top-down and state-led approach. She advocated for the so-called fieldism, Genbashugi, this idea that projects should be tailored to the necessities on the ground. And very controversially also, her leadership really focused on putting poverty reduction as a goal in and of itself, and not just as a positive externality of economic growth and development, which has been really the standard traditional idea of Japanese aid. So in this sense, it is easy to understand why some scholars say that there is a going back, a revisionist tendency in Japanese aid at the moment, because many of the traditional ODA model features are really back and prominently in the agenda. But what I really would like to end on and potentially open a discussion is thinking about the difficulty for Japan to reconcile the ODA policy and its outreach to Southeast Asia with what has been defined as value-based diplomacy, so Kachikan Gaiko. So we talked a lot about Japan wanting to present itself as this new defender of the liberal international order, and obviously FOIP pretty much focuses on the economic liberalism side of the discourse, but we shouldn't also forget that there is a political side to liberalism, which is also enshrined in the official documents of the Japanese foreign minister. The value-based diplomacy in and of itself is a label that was really much more prominent in the first years of the Abe administration. It kind of died out a bit. It was pretty much the brainchild of Asotaro, but still, it's still there in the documents. And according to it, human rights, freedom, and democracy are fundamental values, and their protection and promotion serve as the cornerstone of peace and stability in the international community. So there is also a political element to this international liberal order that Japan wants to protect in Southeast Asia. And this raises several questions, because obviously out of the top 6 recipients of Japanese ODA, which are India, Bangladesh, Philippines, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Vietnam, all of which obviously are in Southeast and South Asia, 3 of them are, by all accounts, non-democracies. Obviously, we're talking about Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And as Professor Shani was saying earlier, with the Modi administration in India, there has been a lot of debate whether we can still count India as a liberal democracy. And other countries as well, the Philippines, there is legitimate room for wondering whether we can really see them as like-minded partners for Japan. So with Duterte, for example, basically his main achievement during his presidency was supervising this massive extrajudicial killing campaign against drugs, apparently. But so it's really, we were really in a situation in which the more Japan tries to present itself as wanting to defend values and trying to reshape its foreign policy as being driven by values, the more it is forced to really engage in a balancing act in Southeast Asia. And one key example has been in Myanmar over the past year. Obviously, after the military coup of February 2021, Myanmar became a battleground between these 2 sides of Japanese foreign policy. So, and really shows how ODA cannot really be disconnected from the discourse over universal values and democracy and human rights, because the Japanese reaction to the coup was really that of suspending aid to Myanmar. That is really the standard reaction that usually Japan has over military coups. It did the same also in Thailand, for example, in 2015, because Japan, in principle, is opposed to blanket sanctions. And on the other hand, the case was also very enigmatic, because the business community and the political elites are very much against this idea of Japan embracing this Western style value-based approach, because they argue that it's going to be counterproductive and really compromise the long-term interest that Japan has in Southeast Asia, and especially with Myanmar, with a country with which Japan has built a special relationship throughout the post-war period. The aspect of values is really an interesting. I'm very interested in hearing what other scholars have to say on this, because it is a new page in Japanese foreign policy, especially in Southeast Asia. Japan has always prided itself in being a very pragmatic diplomatic counterpart. A recent publication defines Japan as the courteous power in Southeast Asia, because it doesn't really assume to export a political model or to impose human rights on its diplomatic counterparts in the region. But definitely it is also a key aspect of FOIP. And even though it can be understated, it is debatable whether this balancing act is really sustainable on the long term. So yes, that's it for me, and I hope I didn't speak too long.
Thank you very much, Julia, for pointing out this tension between a value-based diplomacy and also the reality on the grounds, which are much more complicated. And now I think that Professor Takeshi Daimon-Sato has been back, has come back.
Yes, sorry.
So, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. For being with us today. Professor Takeshi Daimon-Sato is at the Waseda University, and his focus for today is China-Japan aid competition and possibilities for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you again, and Professor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. So, I apologize for my... I'm currently visiting African country as part of Japan's ODA. Evaluation, and that's is my excuse for delay. But anyway, let me start with the substance. Okay, my name is Takeshi Daimon-Sato, professor at Waseda University, and also a practitioner in various international organizations, JICA, ADB, World Bank, etc. But my today's focus is a political economy aspects of aid, China, Japan, aid competition and possibilities for cooperation. Since I have been told 10 minutes, I don't have many slides to share, but I would like to share only a few points. Looking from Japan's perspective, which country has Japan been focusing on since around early 1990s? This is the ODA, official development assistance in net disbursement. So the blue is China, People's Republic of China, how Japan has assisted PRC, which was a #1 recipient of Japan's ODA until around 2008 and 9. But now it is showing great decline or even minus. Minus means the loan, Japanese loan is borrowed by China is returning to Japan. So actually Japan is assisted by China in the numbers. But this money goes to India. So now India is receiving more loan, ODA assistance from Japan. Around that time, turning point is 2005 or 6, or around the Beijing Olympic in the past, the first one. And because we considered India is strategically important partner as part of free and open FOIP, or free and open Indo-Pacific. So it is a turning point, turning the allies, turning the client from China to India, not only economic reasons, but political economic reasons. So that is a turning point. And this corresponds very well with the economic size of those countries in question and the years of financial crisis 2008, Beijing Olympics 2008. At the time, Chinese economic size just went over to Japan. So they became #2 in the world economy. Before it was Japan, but China quickly catch up with Japan by 2008. Now it is getting to the same level of the all EU economies combined by 2020. So it is by 2021. I'm sure Chinese economic size is nearly the same as the EU combined, or even higher. So I mean that's economic size, and that explains why there's whatever they do in intervention, in assistance, investment, etc., is very big. So in size. And by the way, India in this graph is located as an orange line at the bottom. So India is not as large as, is not as important as China in terms of economic size right now, but it has also catching up with the rest of the world, and the the UK, India is nearly the same level in terms of economic size as of now. So I mean, China, India is obviously very important economic actors in the world, and that is obviously explains why US is feeling a bit threatened by its position as a World Bank is a world #1 economic and military powers, and that's why that may explain a part of the aspects of the new Cold War between China and US. And I'm not talking about the Cold War, that the ODA, but whatever the ODA is very much linked to what the diplomatic policy and domestic policy is related. So they are not separable. So that's my point. And by now, when the pandemic crisis 2020-2021 is over, this is the current situation. And this is the turning point 2008 in the previous Beijing Olympics, and the recent Olympics in Beijing or Tokyo is the turning point in the change of actors. And obviously this is well discussed by many people, I'm sure, but so this is a well-known scheme of Belt and Road Initiative, and with which Japan's position has been a little bit taking a distance with this Chinese ideas of BRI for geopolitical reasons mainly. So obviously we're not directly opposing to BRI, but counter-proposing the free and open Indo-Pacific. So focusing on India instead of China, and focusing on Indochina and Southeast Asia. So that's the area. I mean, Indochina and Southeast Asia is the area in which China and Japan are most severely competing in terms of the market share and ODA, because ODA in many areas like railway or power generations is a zero-sum game, not win-win game. So if you take this country's railway or power, you're losing. That's the case. This happens to Indonesia in terms of high-speed railway in 2015. And that's also the same year Japan won the bid over China in terms of India's high railway in the same year. So that's India, but of course, India is also strategically important. But you see, there's also added to that, on top of that, there is other strategic implications of that, which is quadrilateral strategic alliance between US, Japan, Australia, and India. And this is considered to be more strategic and even military. So it has been received with very much concerns by China. So they criticize a lot about that, initially proposed by Abe, etc. So because we wanted India to our side, contrary to what Japanese government had expected on Quad and FOIP, and India, expectation on India, there is some disappointment made in a recent meetings with and Prime Minister Modi in New Delhi 2 days ago, last week, following the situation in Ukraine. So this is just some two paragraphs I just extracted from them. So that they did not mention anywhere about Russia here, but they mentioned the Quad. They mentioned Quad, and it's important in terms of dealing with COVID and emerging technology, climate, etc. But then cybersecurity, space, and so on. So there has no mentions about China there, and the second paragraph, the prime ministers expressed that there's serious concern about the crisis in Ukraine they express just concerns. That is considered to be a diplomatic defeat for Japan. For Japan, also recognition that India is not. Of course, India depends a lot on military weapons on Russia, so we do understand. But India was part of the Quad and part of FOIP. It doesn't mean that they fully appreciated the value and so on. What Abe wanted to imply there. So that's a hard realities that we face now. So in India is our allies, but we have to take the current issues as a very serious case study. And I mean, it is not that India is part of us, but it's also part of the other side. So I mean, that's a very complex issue. But the issue, Japan's position on assisting India is still going on, hoping that the alliance of Indo-Japan will result in as a good counter proposal to the BRI pursued by China. But this is not very much black and white, very clear strategic implications given the current uncertainties in Ukraine and Russia, I think. So that's why I would like to end this with this note without being a bit inconclusive. Yes, for the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Takeshi Daimonsato. And now we conclude the list of our speakers with last but not least is from Berlin, Dr. Gudrun Wacker. She's an expert and a scholar at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Dr. Gudrun Wacker has always focused on the relationship between the European Union and East Asian, and she has been working on the Indo-Pacific from the European perspective. So I think this was a great focus for the last speech today, so we can reflect on the role that the European Union can play and possible arenas of cooperation between the EU and Japan. So Gudrun, thank you very much again for being with us today, and the floor is yours for your talk. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Giuseppe. I'm very happy to be here. I would have preferred to be in Torino, but consider yourself lucky today, yesterday, the infection rate for the first time crossed the 200,000 per day in Germany. So I'm happy to stay away, but I'm happy to be able to participate in this way. I think I see my task also a little bit being the last speaker and binding together and drawing some parallels here. And the first remark I want to make is that the Indo-Pacific is a construct. And there are vast differences between the concepts, how the Indo-Pacific concept is understood and what the strategy is in the different countries, starting with the 4 members of the Quad, but also ASEAN's paper and then the European approach. So I earlier posted in the chat a few links to some publications that I, with some other people at my institute, did. I also want to say I'm not working for a university. I'm in a think tank, and our task is to advise the German government. Usually they don't listen to us, but I come from a slightly different angle than the rest of the speakers. So let's start with the European Union, and I will not talk a lot about the UK, although it also has declared its own Indo-Pacific tilt, but I will sort of leave out the UK more or less. So for the European Union, this whole coming about of an Indo-Pacific strategy has been a very unusual process, because it was not that the EU sort of rolled out the concept, but it was really a bottom-up initiative started by France in 2018, really. But at the time, it didn't have a lot of support, because France is in a very unique position in the Indo-Pacific due to its overseas territories, its French citizens, military presence, exclusive economic zones, etc. So basically, it's a post-colonial or even colonial presence that France has, and this did not find a lot of support in the rest of the European Union. But after ASEAN published their outlook on the Indo-Pacific, the idea and the concept had a little more traction in Europe, and Germany and the Netherlands published their own, not strategy, but guidelines on the Indo-Pacific. And these guidelines were written as building blocks for an EU strategy. So they were already meant to be leading up to an EU strategy on the Indo-Pacific. So this happened in 2020. And if you know the EU, you can only say that it all happened very fast after that. The three countries, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, they got support from some other member states. They pushed it on the agenda of the EU, and you had in spring last year the Council conclusions, and then later last year, the joint communication, which is now the Indo-Pacific strategy of the EU. I think that the ASEAN members published this outlook made a difference from the European perspective, because before that, it was really mainly the Quad countries that pushed the Indo-Pacific concept. And this was sort of Indo-Pacific and Quad were basically the same thing, and the Chinese reaction to this effort, as they saw it, to contain China's rise was seen very negative, and so the Europeans were sort of in a wait-and-see position. The UK, as I already said, early last year, they also published their tilt to the Indo-Pacific, and they have very ambitious plans there. So where do we stand, and what's the assessment of the European goals and the major pillars? I think it's very, very compatible with what we heard about Japan's major objectives. The Netherlands and Germany especially say we are trading nations. We depend on open markets. We depend on open sea lanes. But we also see that the rules-based international order is challenged in the Indo-Pacific. They don't say explicitly by China's rise, but it's implied. So the idea of the European approach is, first of all, to diversify our own relationships in the region beyond China, because in the past, when you talked about Asia, after 2 minutes, you talked about China and nothing else. So diversify the relationships, deepen the partnerships, and offer some sort of alternative to this kind of binary choice between the US and China. This is how I see the major goals. So the EU wants to make a bigger contribution, seeing that this is the region where the future of the international order will be decided, because the challenge mainly comes from China. Now, it's not that the EU is new in the Indo-Pacific. I think it was mentioned that we are the biggest investor in Southeast Asia, for example. So very trade and investment relations exist already. The European Union is the biggest donor for the Southeast Asia, at least. And there were a lot of efforts to become more active in the field of non-traditional security in the past. But one of the problems the EU always had was visibility. I think looking at this Indo-Pacific approach of the EU, it's a positive thing that there is more focus on the region instead of only looking at China. So if you compare it to the United States, the European Union always looked at China in terms of the bilateral relationship, which was very strongly economically determined. And then from a global perspective, so climate change, biodiversity, non-proliferation, that was very much on the agenda of the EU with China, but not the region and not China's behavior in the region. For the US, on the other hand, this is the first entry point. If they look at China, they see it through the lens of the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific or whatever you call it. So I think there is a little bit of an alignment in the perspective, and that's a good thing if the Europeans start to understand the needs in the region better than they did before and see how China is perceived as an actor, even if it's not always very openly stated by the countries in the region. A first summit meeting, not really a summit because it was the foreign ministers who attended, took place this year and in February under the EU presidency of France. So the French really are trying to push the operationalization of this strategy. Now, I come to an unfortunate aspect of the EU strategy, and it has mainly to do with timing. Basically, on the very same day as the EU announced its Indo-Pacific strategy, the US, Australia, and the UK announced AUKUS, and this basically took the headlines. So nobody cared about the EU strategy anymore. Everybody wrote about AUKUS and the implications of that. And of course, Europeans are not very happy about that. And then when the forum took place, this was on February 22nd in Paris, it was already overshadowed by the real possibility of a war in Ukraine. So again, in a way, you know, the European agenda for the Indo-Pacific was pushed to the background in a way. So this brings me to the challenges, and there are a lot. And I start with some things that have been raised by the other speakers. One, for example, is the tension between multilateralism and minilateralism. Because for the EU, of course, multilateralism is the natural inclination. You know, this is the approach of the EU to basically everything. So they cling very much to ASEAN and ASEAN-centered organizations, while they have a problem, maybe with the exception of France, to deal with these minilateral formats that might be better in actually delivering, while ASEAN-centered organizations are not famous for their effectiveness, let's put it this way. So this is where the EU has to find a way how to reconcile and how to deal with the minilateral formats. Then I think that another issue was raised by Julia with respect to Japan, and that's the values versus interests. I mean, Germany is also a country that never admitted that we even had national interests. Now we do, but the thing is, and this is my personal belief, if we frame this whole as the US do, what is going on in the world today as the ultimate battle between autocracy and democracy, we will probably miss out on potential partners in the region. And I only give a small example, and this is ASEAN and how they gave a very weak statement on Ukraine as an organization, but 8 of 10 member states voted in favor of the UN General Assembly resolution, and Singapore, which is basically unheard of, even passed unilateral sanctions against Russia. So if we, frame it in autocracy, democracy terms, this will not get us very far, and we will exclude possible partners that share the same interests, which is we don't want to be bullied by great powers. Might does not make right, and we should make this coalition as broad as possible. So this is another big challenge I see. But the biggest probably now in light of the Ukraine crisis and Russia's attack is that if we don't follow up and follow through on the Indo-Pacific, we will again, as the European have, created a lot of expectation and then fall short in reality. And the risk is very high because, of course, Russia and its behavior forces the European attention back to our immediate neighborhood. This is clear, but this is not only a matter of perspective, it's also will have implication in real terms. For example, there is a budget for capacity building. It's called the Peace Facility in EU speak. And this budget was earmarked also for capacity building, for example, on maritime domain awareness and other things in the Indo-Pacific. But now this budget for this year and next year is 100% swallowed by the new situation we are facing with Ukraine. So there are very practical problems as well. So I see the danger that the EU will, do again the navel gazing, dealing with its own problems and with its neighborhood, and forget that there is the Indo-Pacific and its significance hasn't changed, not in economic terms, not in geopolitical terms. So we need to give this some attention. And this is basically where I see Japan coming in to conclude, because clearly Japan and its agenda with the Indo-Pacific is very compatible with what the Europeans are trying to do, peace and prosperity, also a strong focus on economic prosperity, which is so far lacking from the US approach, if you will. I mean, it has been announced, but let's wait and see. We have a FTA with Japan. We have a partnership cooperation agreement. Japan is a partner in the connectivity initiative on the European side, is a member of the G7 and the G20, and it's a partner of NATO. So I think that it will be Japan's task sort of to remind us, to not drop the ball on the Indo-Pacific completely and try to come up with some follow-up, and probably together we can come up with some really visible joint projects in the region that show that we can provide a sustainable alternative to what other countries might offer without any strings attached. This video that we saw in the very beginning this morning, this could also be produced by the EU, but we usually don't do that. What is really scary to me is that the same video could today also be produced by China using almost the same words. And this is the final challenge. We are living in a world where it's harder and harder to, you know, discern what is real and what is not, what is fake news, what is disinformation, and how words are twisted in a way. If you look, for example, at the Russian-Chinese joint statement, it talks about Russia and China being the real democracies delivering to their people. And it's mind-boggling, you know, and how will we deal with this challenge also, because the disinformation of Russia and China does not primarily aim at the West. It's aiming at Southeast Asia, at South Asia, and I think there is fertile ground for this kind of propaganda to take root. And we will certainly not be able to counter it by rolling out our own, you know, falsehoods and propaganda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gudrun. I think it was a perfect conclusion for today's seminar, and it's a bit also a kind of call to action from the side of the European Union. So, and we are lucky to have people like you focusing on these aspects and reminding us of the importance of the Indo-Pacific for the future, even in these tragic times for the Ukrainian war. So I would say that you know, in our university, in our courses, we have been looking at this part of the region, and we will continue to do so, because we really believe that the future of all of us belongs to what is going on in the end in this region, call it the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific or East Asia. So I think we have some 15 minutes for the Q&A session. So if you want to ask your question, and if you are in class, you can just raise your hand, and you can come here and ask the question yourself. Or if you are online, you can just please write your name on the chat, and our media manager, Francesco Merlo, will pick you up, and you can open your mic and the camera, and you can put forward your question. So please. And I encourage also my students who have been working on the strategies to come forward with their comments or questions and consideration. Don't be shy. Okay, James Quinn, come here, please. Okay.
Thank you, Professor. So last week I was sitting here having a presentation with my teammates. We made the presentation on Japan. And I remember I was discussing about Japanese armed forces, and that Japan is one of the countries that spends less on military forces. And with the plan of having a freedom of navigation, shouldn't the Japanese government increase military expenditure? And is that something feasible with the constitution and everything? I'm asking the consul, of course, because you represent the Japanese government. But of course, anybody else wants to. Other speakers, please.
Okay, so the question would be about the military possible, you know, the necessity to have a proper military presence in the region to foster, to defend the very principle of free and open Indo-Pacific, meaning can a strategy like the free and open Indo-Pacific being pursued without a stronger military build-up of Japan in the region. I don't know if some of the speakers would like to pick up the question. Otherwise, we ask Mr. Consul. Okay, so I think Mr. Consul is your turn. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for questions. Well, I'd like to avoid using the military expenses, defense expenses for defense forces. But as I said in my statement, by the Foreign Minister Hayashi on the 22nd of February, he said the strengthening of Japan's own defense capabilities. We have to strengthen our defense capabilities surrounding our country, and together with the Japan-U.S. alliance. These are the core of Japanese defense policy for that. Well, we cannot export military equipment to other countries, but we have to strengthen the capability of defense our country. That's the simple answer. Thank you very much.
And thank you also for reminding us the official name, which is the Defense Forces, of course, of Japan. There are constitutional constraints, and I think that these constraints are going to stay there for the time being, of course. Okay. Okay, Gudrun, please.
Takeshi-san was first.
I may quickly add to Mr. Counsel. I know because it's difficult for officials to be very explicit about the statement. So as just a quick compliment. My personal view is, as an expert on not a military expert, but expert on strategic issues and its combinations with ODA. And as far as Japan's defense capacity is concerned, I think the defense capacity can be increased by three matters. One is money or budget. Second is the personnel. And the three, which I think is most important, is a strategy or planning. And for Japan, we can increase the money or personnel, but we don't, from my point of view, we do not have a strategy clear in a defense strategy. So before we talk about the budget increase, etc., I think for us to do the capacity by having a clear strategy linked to the diplomacy and foreign aid, etc., within, of course, constitutional constraint. We have a clear policy of nuclear policy of don't make nuclear, don't own nuclear, and don't bring nuclear from outside. But we are questioning and debating the third principles of nuclear, whether we should not bring nuclear from abroad, whether we should talk about nuclear sharing as the case in EU or the case in NATO, etc. But that is still under discussion, and that is also part of the strategy, and which is yet to be decided. And that's my additional point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, first of all, it's not only a question of money. So I very much agree with Takeshi-san. I mean, look at the German government that made a total U-turn on military expenditure. But the problem will be, can we absorb this money in any way that makes sense, you know? And it makes sense because you have a strategy, and that defines then what kind of capabilities and personnel you need, and not the other way around. To just buy hardware is not the issue. I think Japan has always spent about 1% roughly of its GDP on arms or on the military. And, you know, it has a quite capable Navy and Coast Guard, etc. The issue is, and I think we should really discuss that. What does freedom of navigation mean? What do the US mean by freedom of navigation? What do we mean as Europeans, for example? I think the focus is very much on commercial freedom of navigation, so that the supply chains are not interrupted, the slots remain open, etc. The US definition of freedom of navigation is very much narrowed down to the military kind of, you know, innocent passage. We sail and fly wherever we want, etc. And the question is, where is the challenge for freedom of navigation? Is it to the commercial, or is it to the military vessels that are traversing the region? So these are questions we have to discuss before we say Japan should spend more money on military. I mean, Japan has relaxed its export controls on arms and is even giving some, I think, Coast Guard vessels to the Philippines and Vietnam as ODA. I think Germany would have a problem to define that at ODA, but there you go. So we see gradual steps, but the constitutional restraints are, of course, also important. And one thing that is specific in Japan is also that the companies that produce arms are mostly civilian companies. So they also have to deal with public opinion in the country. This is usually, these two are separated, which makes it easier. Germany has a military companies, and then we have, you know, other companies. But in Japan, this is really a unit. And so you also have to look for what public opinion says about spending money on that, exporting arms, and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Gudrun. I think we have time for a last one, if there is one, maybe in the chat or in the class, or maybe Gianluca or Giorgio or Julia want to add something or final remarks. Gianluca, maybe.
Yeah. Yes. If we don't have questions, yes, that's quite interesting. Like as I said, as I touched briefly upon during my presentation, all these overlapping things of minilateralism, multilateralism, and acronyms, you know, springing out from everywhere. They really, as Gudrun slightly touched upon, they really won't make any difference if we don't understand the convergences and the divergences of different opinions and inside the countries that make the frameworks, that constitute the frameworks. So what's for us as a regional order, a liberal order, post-liberal order, might not be a liberal order for other countries. And I really don't see, as Giorgio was also saying about India's stance recently towards geopolitical issues in the world, it doesn't really make sense unless we have real mutual interests. And what I could say might have some hope there is how middle powers deal with peripheries. So how they deal with influence in other countries, not directly India, not directly the big powers, China, but other countries. So the weakest countries in ASEAN, for example, or Oceania, for example. Nobody talks about that when we talk about Indo-Pacific. And the reason why Japan is so active in Oceania is that because they have a very live memory of what happened in case of a war between in the Indo-Pacific region. So that is, I think, a point that we should really take into account when talking about new developments and frameworks, either economic, political, or security frameworks in the Pacific.
Well, thank you, Gianluca. I think this is a good point to conclude today our seminar, because as I was telling at the very beginning, this seminar is is within the framework of my lab, which is called Regional Dynamics in the Asia Pacific, and I think that a seminar like this one, is a testimony, is evidence of the fact that the situation is really very dynamic. It's very dynamic, and I would say that the region is in flux, and that's why you see, Gianluca, this overlapping. And as Gudrun, Giorgio, and Julia, and Koga, they would point out that there are contradictions, but contradictions are, of course, quite normal when you are framing a region, when you are looking into the future, when you are recreating spaces and narratives of spaces. So in the lab, we have spent 3 sessions working on the definitions of a region. So even defining the region is a problem, and is crucial to understand. So I really thank every speaker. I think it was a great session. So many thoughts and reflections, and of course we don't have solutions, but I think that, as Gudrun was saying, in the end, the European Union and Japan share much of their vision of the future, especially also because we share some bad memories of the conflict of the Second World War, and we as democracies have been working so much on making sense of conflicts and the real tragedies that conflict bring about in the world. So I think that this is a good chance for us to reflect on the relationship with Japan from the Indo-Pacific point of view, and I'm sure there will be other chances and occasions to talk again about these issues, and to people online, to my students in class, to speakers, to the consul and vice consul, and Professor Anna Caffarena. Thank you very much for joining us, and stay in touch with T-Way and the YouTube channel of T-Way, and you would be able to watch again this seminar on our channels. And I would thank in the end Mr. Francesco Merlo, the media manager of T-Way. Without him, this hybrid event would not have been possible. So thank you again, and thank you everyone, and stay in touch. Thank you.